In the shadows of St. Michael's Church, a gang of bikers surrounds an aging priest, demanding he fight their leader. Their cruel laughter echoes through the empty parking lot as they mock his collar and weathered face. What they don't realize is that before Father Thomas found God, he was Captain Thomas "Ghost" Morrison, a Force Recon Marine and one of the deadliest combat specialists in Afghanistan, with confirmed kills that still haunt his dreams. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across St. Michael's Church as Father Thomas Morrison finished hearing the day's final confession. The small parish, nestled in the outskirts of Providence, Rhode Island, had been his sanctuary for the past 7 years, a place where he sought redemption for the lives he had taken in another lifetime. As he stepped out of the confessional, the familiar weight of his silver cross pressed against his chest, a constant reminder of his vow to leave violence behind. The rumble of motorcycles in the distance drew his attention to the stained glass windows. Through the colored panes, he watched as 5 Harley-Davidsons pulled into the church parking lot, their chrome pipes gleaming in the dying light. The riders, members of the notorious Devil's Hand MC, had been terrorizing local businesses for protection money. Father Thomas had heard their names in whispered confessions, stories of broken bones and shattered lives. As he walked down the center aisle, memories he'd long suppressed began to surface. The weight of his collar felt heavier than usual, reminding him of another weight he once carried, the M4 carbine that had become an extension of his arm during his 3 tours in Afghanistan. Before the cloth, before seeking absolution, he had been Captain Morrison, call sign Ghost, a Force Recon Marine whose precision in combat had become legendary within the Corps. The heavy wooden doors creaked open, and Marco "Blade" Rodriguez, the Devil's Hand's enforcer, swaggered in. His leather cut was adorned with patches marking his violent achievements, and a fresh bandage across his face spoke of recent violence. Behind him, 4 other bikers spread out, their boots echoing on the ancient stone floor. The smell of leather, cigarettes, and danger filled the sacred space. "Evening, Father." Blade's voice carried a mocking tone. "Heard you've been telling people not to pay our protection fees. That's bad for business." He ran a finger along the wooden pew, his rings leaving scratches in the polished surface. "Real bad." Father Thomas stood quietly, his hands clasped before him. Years of military training screamed at him to assess threats, identify exits, catalogue potential weapons. Instead, he forced himself to remember his vows. "This is a house of God, Mr. Rodriguez. Perhaps we could discuss this matter civilly." Blade laughed, the sound bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. "Civilly? Sure, Father. Let's be civil." He reached into his cut and pulled out brass knuckles, sliding them onto his fingers with practiced ease. "How's this for civil? You're going to walk out there with us, and we're going to have a little chat about minding your own business." As the bikers moved to surround him, Father Thomas noticed a young altar boy, Timothy, hiding behind a pillar. With a subtle nod, he signaled the boy to run. The child's footsteps faded as he escaped through the sacristy. "Your quarrel is with me," Father Thomas said calmly, even as his mind catalogued every detail. The way Blade favored his right leg, how the biker to his left kept his hand near a concealed weapon, the positions of the others forming a loose circle. "Let's take this outside, away from sacred ground." The setting sun painted the church parking lot in shades of amber and crimson as Father Thomas stepped out, surrounded by the bikers. The rumble of more motorcycles announced the arrival of additional Devil's Hand members, drawn by the promise of violence against the defiant priest. Blade circled him, brass knuckles glinting. "Last chance, Father. Either you walk away and forget what you've seen, or we remind you why people in this neighborhood know better than to cross the Devil's Hand." Father Thomas closed his eyes briefly, saying a silent prayer, not for protection, but for forgiveness for what he might have to do. When he opened them again, something had changed. His posture shifted imperceptibly, his feet settling into a familiar stance that had saved his life countless times in distant combat zones. "I took vows of peace," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of both regret and resolution. "But before that, I took other vows, to protect the innocent, to stand against tyranny. I had hoped to keep those lives separate, but you've left me no choice." The sun dipped below the horizon, and in the gathering darkness, Father Thomas Morrison prepared to face his past and his present in a confrontation that would shatter the peace he had built for himself over the past 7 years. As the tension mounted in the church parking lot, a police siren wailed in the distance. Timothy, the altar boy, had managed to reach Officer Sarah Chen, a regular parishioner who understood the delicate balance of peace in their troubled neighborhood. The approaching sound caused several of the Devil's Hand members to shift uneasily, but Blade remained focused on Father Thomas, a predatory smile playing across his scarred face. "Looks like someone called the cops," Blade sneered, adjusting his brass knuckles. "Too bad they won't get here in time to save you, Father." He gestured to 2 of his men. "Watch the street. Make sure we're not interrupted." Father Thomas remained still, his calm exterior masking the tactical assessments running through his mind. 7 years of peaceful service had not erased 2 decades of military training. He noticed how the younger bikers kept looking to Blade for cues, revealing their hierarchy. The way they positioned themselves showed their inexperience. Too close together, creating overlapping lines of fire if weapons were drawn. The church doors opened again, and Sister Margaret stepped out, her aged frame carrying an authority that made even hardened criminals pause. The 70-year-old nun had served at St. Michael's for over 4 decades and had seen the neighborhood transform from a working-class haven to a battleground for rival gangs. "Father Thomas," she called out, her voice steady despite the danger. "The bishop is on the phone. He needs to speak with you immediately about tomorrow's ceremony." Her eyes swept over the assembled bikers with disapproval rather than fear. Blade moved to block her path. "The father's busy right now, sister. Church business can wait." Sister Margaret fixed him with a stern gaze that had cowed generations of unruly schoolchildren. "Young man, nothing takes precedence over God's work. I suggest you and your friends return when Father Thomas is available for counseling, during daylight hours preferably, and wearing something more appropriate for a house of worship." The moment crystallized something for Father Thomas. Sister Margaret's courage, Timothy's quick thinking, the approaching siren, all of it reminded him of another time, another place. Kandahar Province, 2009. His unit protecting a local school against Taliban insurgents. The same mix of innocents and aggressors, the same need to make impossible choices. A sleek black SUV pulled into the parking lot, its tinted windows reflecting the last rays of sunlight. The vehicle's arrival caused a visible shift in the biker's demeanor. The rear door opened, and Marcus, the Judge Romano, stepped out. The Devil's Hand's president was a different breed from his soldiers, dressed in an expensive suit rather than leather, his grey hair neatly styled. His presence here meant the situation was more serious than a simple intimidation attempt. "Father Morrison," Romano's voice carried the polished accent of good education, "I apologize for my men's lack of decorum. I had hoped to speak with you privately about recent events in the neighborhood." Father Thomas recognized the careful manipulation in Romano's words, the same techniques he'd used himself during interrogations. "Mr. Romano, I wasn't aware the Devil's Hand's leadership took such an interest in parish affairs." "Please," Romano smiled, spreading his hands in a gesture of false peace. "Call me Marcus, and I take an interest in anything that affects my business interests." Your recent sermons about standing up to extortion have been problematic. Sister Margaret moved to stand beside Father Thomas, her presence a reminder of his current obligations. The approaching police siren grew louder, then suddenly cut off, Officer Chen likely parking nearby, waiting for backup before approaching. "Perhaps," Father Thomas suggested, his voice carrying the same diplomatic tone he'd used in countless military negotiations, "we could continue this discussion tomorrow after morning mass, in my office, with proper respect for this sacred ground." Romano studied him for a long moment, and Father Thomas recognized the evaluation in his eyes. The same look he'd seen in warlords and tribal leaders sizing up an opponent. "Of course, Father, we respect the church's role in the community," he turned to his men. "Blade, we're leaving. We'll continue this discussion tomorrow." As the bikers mounted their motorcycles, Romano lingered. "One question, Father. Before you took your vows, what branch did you serve in? There's something in the way you carry yourself." "Good evening, Mr. Romano," Father Thomas replied, deliberately ignoring the question. "I'll see you at tomorrow's Mass." The bikers roared away into the gathering darkness, leaving behind a heavy silence. Sister Margaret touched Father Thomas's arm gently. "There was blood in his eyes," she said quietly. "The same look I saw in my brother when he came back from Vietnam. Whatever you did before coming to us, Thomas, I fear it won't stay buried much longer." Father Thomas watched the taillights disappear around the corner, knowing that tomorrow's meeting would never happen. Romano's question confirmed his suspicions. Someone had recognized him, had connected Father Thomas Morrison to Captain Ghost Morrison. The carefully constructed wall between his past and present was crumbling. "Sister," he said softly, "would you please ensure Timothy gets home safely? I need to prepare for tomorrow's challenges." And prepare he would, though not in the way she might imagine. Tonight would require a different kind of preparation, one that had nothing to do with sermon writing or prayer. As he walked back into the church, the weight of his past pressed down harder than ever. In the sacristy, behind a loose stone he'd identified his first week here, lay a small box containing remnants of his former life. Tonight, for the first time in 7 years, he would need to open it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The sacristy was silent as Father Thomas knelt before the loose stone, his fingers tracing the familiar edges. The box he withdrew was simple military-grade steel, its surface unmarred despite years of concealment. Inside lay the pieces of a life he'd tried to leave behind, a worn Marine Force Recon patch, a set of dog tags, and a small key to a storage unit across town that contained more dangerous remnants of his past. As he held the dog tags, running his thumb over the embossed letters, the church's heavy doors creaked open. Officer Sarah Chen's footsteps echoed through the empty nave, her measured pace indicating she was alone. Father Thomas returned the box to its hiding place, but kept the key, slipping it into his pocket as he rose to meet her. "Those bikers are just the beginning," Sarah said without preamble as she entered the sacristy. Her police uniform was pristine, but the dark circles under her eyes spoke of long nights monitoring the escalating gang activity. "The devil's hand is moving to take over the entire east side. 3 businesses were firebombed last week for refusing to pay protection money." Father Thomas nodded, having heard similar stories in confession. "The people are scared, Sarah. Romano's men are getting bolder, and the community is losing faith in the system's ability to protect them. That's why I'm here." Sarah glanced around before lowering her voice. "We've got an undercover operation in play. FBI's involved. Romano isn't just running a motorcycle gang, he's building an empire. Gun running, human trafficking, money laundering through legitimate businesses, but we can't get close enough to gather solid evidence." The revelation hung in the air between them. Father Thomas understood the implications. The Devil's Hand was no longer just a local threat, but part of something far more sinister. Why are you telling me this? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Because tomorrow night, Romano's hosting a big gathering at the Hellfire Club. Every major player in his organization will be there, along with representatives from allied gangs across New England. We've got eyes on the building, but we can't get anyone inside. She paused. And because I know who you were, Captain Morrison. The use of his former rank sent a chill down his spine. How long have you known? Since you first came to St. Michael's. I was a rookie then, but I'd done 2 tours as an MP before joining the force. I recognized the way you moved, the way you constantly scanned rooms and noted exits. Then I did some digging. She pulled out her phone, showing him a heavily redacted military file. Most of your service record is classified, but there's enough here to know you're exactly what we need. Father Thomas turned away, focusing on the crucifix mounted on the wall. I took vows, Sarah. I swore to abandon violence to seek a path of peace. And how peaceful will it be when Romano's men burn down the neighborhood? When more innocent people die because good men chose to do nothing? Her words struck at the core of his internal struggle. We're not asking you to compromise your principles. We just need you to attend the gathering, observe and report, nothing more. Before he could respond, rapid footsteps approached the sacristy. Sister Margaret appeared in the doorway, her face ashen. Father, come quickly. They've taken Timothy. The world seemed to freeze for a moment. What happened? 2 of Romano's men grabbed him on his way home. They left this. She handed him a folded note, her hands trembling. The message was simple. Tomorrow night, the Hellfire Club. Come alone, or the boy dies. It was signed with a crude drawing of a blade. Sarah reached for her radio, but Father Thomas stopped her. No, this is exactly what they want, a reason to hurt him before help can arrive. They're forcing my hand. Then let us handle it, Sarah insisted. We can have tactical teams ready. And risk Timothy's life in a shootout? Father Thomas shook his head. No, I'll go, but not as Father Morrison. He touched the key in his pocket, feeling its weight like a lead sinker pulling him back into deep waters. I'll attend Romano's gathering, but not just as an observer. Timothy's life depends on perfect timing and execution. Sister Margaret touched the cross at her neck. Thomas, whatever you're planning, I need you both to trust me, he interrupted gently, and I need you to understand that after tomorrow night, things at St. Michael's may need to change. He turned to Sarah. You'll have your evidence against Romano, but the price may be higher than you anticipated. The setting sun cast long shadows through the stained glass, painting the sacristy in shades of blood red and deep purple. As Father Thomas looked at the crucifix one last time, he sent up a silent prayer, not for forgiveness this time, but for strength. The strength to walk the narrow line between his past and present, between violence and justice, between the man he had been and the man he had become. Sister, he said quietly, please gather the congregation for an evening prayer vigil. Tell them it's for Timothy's safe return. He turned to Sarah. And I need you to make a call. That storage unit I mentioned, I'll need help getting its contents tonight without attracting attention. The die was cast. Tomorrow night, Romano and his men would learn what so many others had discovered too late, that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who have learned to hide their claws beneath robes of peace. The storage unit facility on the outskirts of Providence stood silent in the midnight hour, its rows of metal doors reflecting the pale moonlight. Father Thomas approached Unit 317 with Officer Chen, following discreetly in an unmarked vehicle, her headlights off. The key felt heavy in his hands, not from its physical weight, but from the weight of the memories it would unlock. Inside the unit, Beneath a layer of mundane boxes labeled with dates from his missionary work lay the real cargo. A false bottom in an old footlocker concealed a custom-made case containing specialized equipment from his Force Recon days. As he lifted the case, Sarah watched from the doorway, her expression a mixture of awe and concern. "When I ran your background," she said quietly, "most of what I found was redacted. But there was one mission report that caught my attention. Operation Ghostwalker, Kandahar, 2010. You went into a Taliban stronghold alone to rescue a group of aid workers. The official report says you eliminated 17 hostiles without taking a single casualty." Father Thomas continued his methodical inventory of the case's contents. "The report was incorrect," he replied softly. "There were 23 hostiles, and I didn't eliminate them. I killed them. Let's be precise about what we're discussing." He removed a set of flexible body armor designed to be worn under clothing. The aid workers were from a Catholic mission. The Taliban had taken them during evening prayers. Some things don't change, whether it's Afghanistan or Providence. Sarah moved closer, examining the equipment he was laying out. "This isn't standard military gear." "No, it's not." He held up what appeared to be a priest's collar. "Ceramic composite, strong enough to deflect a blade. The cloth is lined with a mesh that can stop most small-caliber rounds." He smiled grimly. "When you've done the kind of work I did, you learn to be prepared, even after leaving the service." As they loaded the equipment into Sarah's unmarked car, Father Thomas detailed his plan for infiltrating the Hellfire Club. Romano's gathering isn't just a show of force. He's planning something bigger. The timing, the invited gangs, taking Timothy. It's all too coordinated. "Our intelligence suggests he's planning to announce a major expansion," Sarah confirmed. "The Devil's Hand is merging with 2 other major outlaw motorcycle clubs. Romano will control everything from Boston to Philadelphia. Which means tomorrow night isn't just a party. It's a coronation." Father Thomas's voice carried the calm certainty of a man who had seen similar patterns before. "Romano needs to demonstrate his power, prove he can handle any threats to his authority. Timothy's kidnapping isn't just about me. It's a message to the entire neighborhood. Cross the Devil's Hand, and not even the church can protect you." They drove to a safe house Sarah had arranged, where Father Thomas could prepare without drawing attention. As he began methodically organizing his equipment, she watched him transform. His movements became more precise, his bearing more military. The priest was receding, and the warrior was emerging. "The FBI has surveillance on all approaches to the Hellfire Club," she reported. "Romano's got at least 30 members inside, plus whatever muscle the visiting gangs bring. The building used to be a Prohibition-era speakeasy, multiple exits, underground tunnels. Some of them might not even be on the city plans." Father Thomas nodded, having already researched the location's history. The original cathedral burned down in 1923. When they rebuilt St. Michael's, some of the old tunnel network was incorporated into the church basement. One of those tunnels leads within a block of the Hellfire Club. "That's how I'll get close without being spotted." He began methodically checking his equipment, communications gear, lockpicks, the specially modified collar and vestments. Each item was tested and secured with the precision of muscle memory that 7 years of peace hadn't erased. "Romano will be expecting Father Morrison to walk in through the front door, alone and vulnerable. That works in our favor." "And Blade?" Sarah asked. "He seems to have a personal stake in this." "Marcus, the judge Romano presents himself as a businessman, but Blade is what he truly is, a predator who enjoys causing pain." Father Thomas's voice carried the weight of experience. "Men like that are predictable. They mistake cruelty for strength. When the time comes, that predictability will be his downfall." As dawn approached, Father Thomas knelt in prayer. Not for forgiveness this time, but for clarity. The lives he had taken in Afghanistan still haunted him, but tonight was different. This wasn't about combat or killing, it was about protecting his flock, honoring both his military oath and his priestly vows. Sarah watched him pray, understanding finally dawning on her face. You never really left it behind, did you? The training, the mindset. You just found a different way to use it. Christ drove the money changers from the temple with a whip, Father Thomas replied, rising from his prayers. Sometimes shepherds must bare their teeth to protect their flock. He checked his watch. It's time. Timothy will be expecting his morning altar service. When he's not there, the congregation will know something's wrong. And Romano? Sarah asked. What do you think he's doing right now? Preparing for his coronation, Father Thomas replied, his voice carrying a certainty born of years of combat experience. But he's forgotten something crucial about crowns. He turned to face the rising sun, its light catching the modified priest's collar in his hands. Before you can wear one, you have to be worthy of it. And tonight, Romano will learn that some sins can't be absolved without penance. The morning mass at St. Michael's proceeded without Father Thomas, Sister Margaret leading the congregation in prayer instead. The empty space where Timothy should have been serving as altar boy cast a shadow over the proceedings, his absence a stark reminder of the darkness that had descended upon their community. In the back pew, Officer Chen sat in civilian clothes, watching the worried faces of the parishioners while maintaining radio contact with her FBI counterparts. Meanwhile, beneath the streets of Providence, Father Thomas navigated the ancient tunnel network that honeycombed the city's foundations. The passages still bore scars from the Prohibition era, bullet holes in the brick walls, testament to long-ago confrontations between bootleggers and law enforcement. His modified collar contained a miniaturized communications device, allowing him to maintain contact with Sarah while keeping his hands free. Romano's men are conducting detailed security sweeps of the Hellfire Club. Sarah's voice crackled through the earpiece. And they're taking this seriously. Blade has positioned shooters on the surrounding rooftops. Father Thomas paused at a junction, consulting the century-old maintenance maps he had memorized. Expected. Romano's not just announcing a merger, he's declaring himself king. Kings are always most vulnerable during their coronation. He touched the cross, hanging at his neck, now weighted with ballistic material. Any word on Timothy? Thermal imaging shows activity in the club's basement level. One small heat signature, consistent with a child's profile. Two larger signatures nearby. Sarah's voice carried professional detachment, but Thomas could hear the underlying concern. The FBI wants to move in now, before the gathering starts. No. Father Thomas's response was immediate. Romano's men will execute Timothy at the first sign of a raid. We stick to the plan. He reached a heavy iron door, its surface thick with rust. Beyond it lay access to the Hellfire Club's old liquor storage cellar. I'm approaching the entry point now. Maintain radio silence unless emergency. The door's hinges protested as he eased it open, the sound echoing through the tunnel. The cellar beyond was dimly lit by ancient emergency lights, creating pools of sickly yellow illumination in the darkness. The air carried the musty scent of age, mixed with something else, the sharp tang of gun oil and leather. Romano's men had been through here recently. As he moved through the shadows, Father Thomas reflected on the parallel between this underground journey and his spiritual path. Both involved moving through darkness toward redemption, though tonight's redemption would come at a higher price than usual. The modified vestments beneath his clothes felt like armor, which in truth they were, both spiritual and literal. Above, the first guests would be arriving for Romano's gathering. The Devil's Hand had spent weeks preparing for this night, consolidating their power, eliminating potential opposition. They had chosen the Hellfire Club for its symbolism as much as its security. A former church converted into a den of iniquity, now serving as the coronation ground for a new criminal empire. Father Thomas reached the access panel leading to the club's basement level, pausing to listen. Two voices carried through the thin wall, their conversation revealing more than they intended. "The kid's still crying," one voice complained. "Can't we just gag him?" "Boss wants him conscious and scared," another replied. "Says it'll make the priest more cooperative when he shows up. Besides, Blade's got something special planned for both of them." "Yeah? Like what?" "Don't know details, but I heard him talking about making examples. Something about how a shepherd can't protect his flock if his legs are broken." Father Thomas closed his eyes, centering himself. The casual cruelty in their voices reminded him of other times, other places. The cold calculations of warlords who thought power gave them the right to destroy lives. He had seen where such paths led, had walked similar dark roads himself before finding his way to the light. The passage ahead split into 3 branches. The leftmost would lead to Timothy, but approaching directly would alert the guards. The center path led to the main club area, where Romano's coronation would soon begin. The right fork accessed the building's electrical and ventilation systems. Each option presented different tactical advantages and risks. "Sarah," he whispered into his comm, "I need a current count on roof positions." 4 confirmed shooters," she replied, "plus heavy security at all ground-level exits. Romano just arrived with his personal detail. Blade's not with him, still unaccounted for." Father Thomas processed this information, combining it with his knowledge of the building's layout. Romano's choice to separate from his enforcer was telling, keeping Blade in reserve, probably close to Timothy, ready to execute the boy if anything went wrong. The sound of music began pulsing through the ceiling. The gathering was starting. Soon, Romano would begin his ceremony, unifying 3 major criminal organizations under his leadership. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and Timothy would die. Too late, and Romano's empire would be born, threatening not just this neighborhood, but the entire eastern seaboard. Father Thomas reached into his pocket, touching the smooth surface of his military dog tags. Tonight, 2 paths that should never have crossed would intersect, the warrior he had been and the priest he had become. The church taught that redemption was possible for anyone willing to truly repent. But as he prepared to move into position, Father Thomas wondered if some sins required more than just prayer to be absolved. The Hellfire Club's main hall pulsed with anticipation as motorcycle gang leaders from across New England filtered in through the heavy wooden doors. The space, once a grand church sanctuary, had been transformed into a testament to excess. Stained glass windows depicting saints had been replaced with stylized demons, their eyes seeming to follow movement below. Where an altar once stood, a raised platform now dominated the room, crowned with an ornate chair that bore more resemblance to a throne than furniture. Father Thomas observed the scene from a concealed position in the ventilation system, cataloguing faces and weapons. His military training allowed him to identify the key players: Jack Hangman McGrath from the Boston Reapers, Vincent Plague Rossi representing the New York Devils, and at least 5 other major gang leaders. Each had brought their personal security details, making the room a powder keg of competing egos and hidden firearms. "Sarah," he whispered into his comm, "I count 37 potential hostiles in the main room. Multiple submachine guns poorly concealed under leather jackets. They're expecting trouble." "Confirmed," she replied softly. "FBI tactical teams are holding position 6 blocks out. But Thomas, there's something else. We just intercepted a partial phone conversation. Romano's planning some kind of demonstration tonight. Something about cleansing the neighborhood of its false shepherd." The implications were clear. Romano wasn't just planning to kill him. He intended to make a spectacle of it, cementing his authority by publicly executing a man of God. The strategy was familiar to Father Thomas. He had seen similar displays of power during his military service, warlords using public brutality to crush any hope of resistance. The crowd's murmuring suddenly quieted as Marcus Romano made his entrance. The gang leader had exchanged his usual business suit for something more ceremonial, a white leather jacket adorned with elaborate patches denoting his rank and achievements in the outlaw biker world. 2 personal bodyguards flanked him, their hands never far from their weapons. "Brothers," Romano's voice carried across the converted sanctuary with practiced authority, "tonight marks the beginning of a new era. For too long, we've allowed ourselves to be confined by outdated territories and petty rivalries. That ends now." He ascended the platform, each step measured and deliberate. The Devil's Hand, the Boston Reapers, and the New York Devils will unite under one banner. Our influence will extend from Maine to Pennsylvania. No more competition, no more wasted resources. The assembled criminals nodded in appreciation, but Father Thomas noted the tension in their postures. Such mergers were rare in their world, and trust was a scarce commodity. Romano would need something dramatic to seal this alliance. As if reading his thoughts, Romano continued, "But before we formalize our arrangement, we have some business to attend to, a demonstration of how we deal with those who dare to challenge our authority." He gestured, and a side door opened. 2 burly bikers dragged Timothy into view, the boy's face tear-stained but defiant. "You see, we have a problem in this neighborhood. A man of the cloth who thinks his collar gives him the right to interfere with our business. A shepherd who's forgotten that every flock needs protection. And protection has a price." Romano's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Father Morrison should be joining us shortly, and when he does, we'll remind everyone why the Devil's Hand demands respect." From his vantage point, Father Thomas could see what the others couldn't. Blade positioned in the shadows behind the platform, methodically sharpening a ceremonial knife. The enforcer's scarred face bore an expression of anticipatory pleasure that sent a chill down Thomas's spine. This wasn't just business for Blade, it was entertainment. "Sarah," Thomas whispered, "I need a distraction, something to thin out the security at the rear entrance. Can you manage that without alerting tactical?" "Give me 2 minutes," she replied. "But Thomas, whatever you're planning, be careful. These people aren't just criminals. They're showmen. They'll be expecting something dramatic." "Good," he responded, beginning to move through the ventilation system toward his chosen entry point. "Because I plan to give them exactly what they're expecting, just not in the way they imagine." Romano was still speaking, outlining his vision of criminal empire, when the first part of Father Thomas's plan went into action. A series of car alarms suddenly erupted in the parking lot, followed by the sound of breaking glass. As predicted, several guards moved to investigate, creating gaps in the security perimeter. Father Thomas used the distraction to drop silently into a darkened alcove, once used for private prayer, now serving as storage for liquor bottles. He removed his outer clothing, revealing the modified vestments beneath, bullet-resistant material disguised as clerical garb, every aspect of his appearance designed to make a statement. "You want a shepherd?" he whispered, checking his equipment one final time. "Then let's see how you handle one who learned to fight wolves before finding his faith." The time for stealth and observation was over. In moments, he would step into the light and confront Romano directly. But first, he touched the cross at his neck and offered a final, silent prayer. Not for himself, but for Timothy, for his congregation, and yes, even for the souls of the men he might have to hurt tonight. Romano's voice rose to a crescendo. "And now, brothers, let's welcome our guest of honor, Father Morrison. I believe it's time for your entrance." Father Thomas straightened his collar and stepped forward, ready to give them an entrance they would never forget. The game was on, and the stakes couldn't be higher. A boy's life, a neighborhood's future, and the delicate balance between his past and present selves. Tonight would determine whether a man could truly serve both God and justice, and at what cost to his soul. The heavy oak doors of the Hellfire Club swung open with deliberate slowness as Father Thomas made his entrance. He walked with measured steps, his bearing a perfect blend of military precision and ecclesiastical dignity. The modified vestments beneath his collar caught the dim light, the material appearing both sacred and somehow dangerous. The assembled criminals fell silent, their conversations dying away as they took in the sight of a priest walking calmly into what should have been an obvious trap. "Welcome, Father Morrison," Romano called from his elevated position. "I trust you found our invitation compelling." He gestured toward Timothy, who was being held firmly by two gang members. The boy's eyes widened at the sight of Father Thomas, a mixture of hope and fear crossing his face. Father Thomas continued his measured advance, his voice carrying clearly through the converted sanctuary. "Mr. Romano, you've desecrated this holy place, threatened my congregation, and harmed an innocent child. I'm here to give you one chance to repent." His words carried the weight of both pastoral authority and combat experience, each step bringing him closer to the center of the room. Romano's laugh echoed off the walls. "Repent? Father, I don't think you understand the situation. This isn't a confession, it's a coronation, and you're here to serve as an object lesson." He nodded to his men, who began to move into predetermined positions around the room. "The neighborhood needs to understand that not even the church can stand against the devil's hand." "Actually," Father Thomas replied, coming to a stop in the exact center of the room, "I understand perfectly. Your men on the roof have been neutralized. Officer Chen's teams have quietly replaced them. The snipers currently watching through those beautiful stained glass windows, they work for the FBI, not you." He smiled slightly as Romano's confident expression faltered. "But that's not what truly concerns you, is it?" From his vantage point, Thomas could see Blade tensing in the shadows, the enforcer's hand tightening on his knife. Romano's face darkened with anger. "Search him," he commanded, and two bikers moved forward, their movements betraying their military background, likely ex-service members who had found a darker purpose after discharge. As they approached, Father Thomas remained perfectly still, his posture relaxed but alert. "Your men have training," he observed quietly. "Marine Corps, I'm guessing, by their movement patterns, which means they should recognize the stance I'm using." The two bikers hesitated, their professional experience finally registering what their conscious minds had missed. The priest before them was carrying himself like a combat veteran. "Enough games," Romano snarled. "Kill him." The two bikers rushed forward simultaneously, their coordination speaking to shared combat experience. But they had never faced someone like Father Thomas. His response was immediate and precise, a fluid combination of moves that spoke of decades of training. The first attacker's punch was deflected with a simple circular motion that sent him stumbling into his partner. Before either could recover, Thomas had disarmed them both, their own momentum used against them with devastating efficiency. "Stand down," Thomas commanded, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a senior military officer. "You've forgotten your oaths, Marines, but it's not too late to remember who you once were." The unexpected display of martial skill created a ripple of uncertainty through the gathered criminals. Romano's face contorted with rage. "Blade, end this now!" The enforcer emerged from the shadows, his ceremonial knife glinting in the light. "With pleasure, boss. You know, Father, I've been looking forward to this. A priest who knows how to fight. This should be interesting." He began circling Thomas, his movements predatory and confident. "Sarah," Thomas whispered into his concealed comm, "status on the basement teams?" "In position," came the quiet reply. "Waiting for your signal." Blade lunged forward with practiced skill, his knife work speaking of years of street fighting experience. But Thomas didn't move defensively as expected. Instead, he stepped into the attack, his modified collar deflecting the blade with a sound of scraping ceramic as he delivered a precise strike to Blade's solar plexus. The enforcer stumbled back, genuine surprise crossing his face. "What the hell are you?" "Once upon a time," Thomas replied calmly, "I was Captain Thomas Ghost Morrison, Force Recon. I've fought warlords in Afghanistan, drug cartels in Colombia, and terrorists in places you've never heard of. Then I found a higher calling." He touched his collar meaningfully. But finding peace doesn't mean forgetting how to fight when peace fails. Romano's composure finally cracked. "Kill him! All of you! Kill him now!" The room erupted into chaos as multiple gang members drew weapons. But Father Thomas had chosen his position carefully. The ceremonial layout of the former church created natural choke points, and the FBI snipers had clear lines of sight through the stained glass. As the first shots rang out, Thomas was already moving, his modified vestments deflecting bullets as he implemented a plan 7 years in the making. The game was no longer about stealth or surveillance. Now it was time to demonstrate why some shepherds were chosen specifically for their ability to deal with wolves. The converted sanctuary erupted into controlled chaos as Father Thomas executed his plan. His movements were precise and economical, each action serving multiple purposes as he navigated through the storm of violence. The first wave of attackers found themselves systematically disarmed and disabled. Their own aggressive moves turned against them with a skill that spoke of thousands of hours of combat training. "Sarah," Thomas spoke calmly into his comm while deflecting a knife thrust. "Execute Phase 2. In response, the building's ancient electrical system suddenly surged, plunging the main floor into darkness while emergency lights cast strange shadows through the demonic stained glass. The effect was disorienting for Romano's men, but Thomas had memorized every inch of the floor plan. Romano's voice cut through the darkness, tinged with growing desperation. "Find him! How hard can it be to kill one priest?" But his men were discovering that Father Thomas was far more than just a priest. He moved like a ghost through the shadows, his modified vestments allowing him to blend seamlessly between patches of darkness while the ceremonial layout of the former church worked to his advantage. Blade, recovering from his earlier surprise, organized a more coordinated response. "Form a perimeter. Don't let him near the boss or the kid." The enforcer's tactical experience showed as he positioned his men in defensive formations. But he had failed to account for one crucial detail. Father Thomas wasn't trying to reach either Romano or Timothy. Not yet. "You know what amazes me, Marcus?" Thomas's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a technique he had perfected in countless combat operations. "You chose this building because you thought it would intimidate me, a church converted into a den of sin. But you forgot something crucial about sacred ground." 3 more attackers went down in quick succession, their groans echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Thomas continued speaking, his voice carrying clearly despite the ongoing chaos. "The sanctity of a place isn't in its walls or windows, it's in the purpose it serves. And tonight this place will serve justice." Romano, still on his elevated platform, drew a custom-made desert eagle from beneath his white leather jacket. "Fine. You want to play games, priest? Let's see how your faith holds up against 45 caliber bullets." He fired repeatedly into the darkness, the massive handgun's muzzle flash temporarily illuminating sections of the room. But Thomas had anticipated this reaction. Each shot was carefully drawn to areas where he had already been, never where he was going. The FBI snipers, watching through their thermal scopes, held their fire as per his instructions. This wasn't just about stopping Romano, it was about breaking his power completely. "Tell me something, Marcus," Thomas called out, his voice now coming from behind a massive support column. Did you research my military background before setting this up? Or did you just assume that a priest would be an easy target?" He paused, letting the question hang in the air. "Because if you had done your homework, you might have learned about Operation Ghostwalker, about how one man systematically dismantled an entire Taliban stronghold to rescue innocent lives." The mention of that classified operation caused several of Romano's ex-military members to hesitate. The story was a legend in certain circles, a Force Recon operator who had become death incarnate to save a group of aid workers. Some of the smarter gang members began backing away, recognizing that they were in the presence of someone far more dangerous than they had been led to believe. "But this isn't Afghanistan," Thomas continued, his movements bringing him steadily closer to his true objective. "And I'm not here to take lives. I'm here to offer a choice." He emerged into a patch of light, standing calmly as guns trained on his position. Surrender now, release Timothy, and face justice through the proper channels, or continue this fight and learn firsthand why some shepherds are chosen specifically for their ability to handle wolves. Romano's response was predictable. Another barrage of gunfire that Thomas evaded with practiced ease. But the gang leader's accuracy was deteriorating, fear finally beginning to erode his composure. "You think you can threaten me? In front of all these witnesses, my empire is being born tonight." "No, Marcus," Thomas replied softly. "Tonight your empire dies in its crib. Your allies are already slipping away, having seen that you couldn't even handle one priest. Your reputation for invincibility is shattered, and in our world, your world and mine, reputation is everything." As if to emphasize his point, Thomas noticed several of the visiting gang leaders quietly making their way toward the exits. The demonstration of power they had come to see was certainly taking place, but not in the way Romano had planned. The would-be king was losing his audience, and with them, any chance of forming his criminal alliance. Blade, recognizing the shifting dynamics, made a tactical decision. "Forget the priest. Secure the exits. Nobody leaves until the boss says so." But his order came too late. The momentum had shifted, and the gathering was rapidly dissolving into a scramble for self-preservation. Father Thomas allowed himself a small smile. Phase 2 was complete. Romano's coalition was crumbling before it could form. Now came the truly dangerous part, extracting Timothy while dealing with those desperate enough to remain loyal to Romano. The boy's life was still at risk, and cornered animals were often the most dangerous. "Last chance, Marcus," Thomas announced, his voice carrying the weight of both military authority and divine judgment. "Release the boy and surrender with dignity, or learn why some of my old military colleagues still wake up in cold sweats remembering Operation Ghostwalker." Romano's composure finally shattered like stained glass under pressure. As his criminal empire crumbled around him, with potential allies fleeing and his own men wavering, the gang leader revealed the desperation that had always lurked beneath his polished exterior. He grabbed Timothy from his guards, pressing the massive desert eagle against the boy's temple. "Enough games, Ghost," Romano snarled, using Father Thomas's old call sign. "Your reputation doesn't mean anything if this boy's blood stains these floors. Drop the act and surrender, or I paint this sanctuary with his brain matter." Father Thomas remained perfectly still, his posture revealing nothing of the calculations running through his military-trained mind. "Timothy," he called out calmly, "close your eyes and recite the Lord's Prayer. Remember what we practiced in altar service." The boy, showing remarkable courage, began whispering the prayer, his voice trembling but determined. "Sarah," Thomas subvocalized into his comm, "status on thermal imaging?" 4 heat signatures on the platform," came the quiet reply. "Romano, the kid, and 2 others in the shadows, likely Blade and 1 more. The rest of the room is clearing out fast." Thomas took a measured step forward, his hands raised in an apparent gesture of surrender. "Marcus, let's be rational about this. You're holding a gun to the head of an altar boy in a former church. Even if you survive tonight, how long do you think you'll last once word gets out? The other gangs won't fear you. They'll see you as a desperate man who threatens children." Romano's hand trembled slightly, but his grip on Timothy remained firm. "Shut up. You don't understand what's at stake here. This merger was everything. Without it, the devil's hand is vulnerable. The other clubs will tear us apart." "Then you need a way out," Thomas replied, taking another careful step. He could see Blade moving in his peripheral vision, the enforcer trying to get into a flanking position. "The FBI has this building surrounded, but if you release Timothy now, I give you my word as both a priest and a Marine that you'll be taken alive and unharmed." "Your word?" Romano laughed bitterly. "The word of a man who pretends to be a priest while hiding the skills of a killer? You're living a lie, Morrison. At least I'm honest about what I am." Thomas's response carried the weight of years of self-reflection. "You're wrong, Marcus. I'm not hiding who I was. I'm using those skills in service of something greater. The same skills that made me effective in combat make me a better protector now. The tactical awareness that kept me alive helps me spot troubled souls in my congregation. Everything I was serves what I've become." As he spoke, Thomas was subtly maneuvering Romano into position. The gang leader was so focused on the philosophical debate that he didn't notice how each step was placing him precisely where Thomas needed him to be. Blade noticed, but his warning came too late. "Boss, he's—" The ancient sprinkler system suddenly activated, triggered by a signal from Officer Chen's team. The sudden downpour of water, combined with the emergency lighting, created a disorienting strobe effect. Romano instinctively looked up, his grip on Timothy loosening for just a fraction of a second. It was all Thomas needed. Moving with the fluid grace of a combat veteran, he closed the distance to the platform in 3 precise steps. His first move disarmed Romano, the Desert Eagle clattering across the floor. The second motion pulled Timothy to safety, pushing the boy toward a predetermined extraction point where FBI agents were waiting. The third move neutralized Romano himself, using the gang leader's own momentum to pin him face down on the platform. But Blade wasn't finished. The enforcer launched himself forward, his ceremonial knife aimed at Thomas's exposed back. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as almost supernatural in its precision. Without releasing his hold on Romano, Thomas shifted his weight slightly. Blade's knife encountered the reinforced collar, deflecting at an angle that threw the enforcer off balance. Thomas's counter-strike was economical and devastating, a short, sharp movement that left Blade unconscious before he hit the floor. "Sarah," Thomas spoke into his comm. "Timothy's clear. Execute final phase." FBI tactical teams breached through multiple entry points simultaneously, their coordinated movement speaking to extensive preparation. As they secured the scene, Thomas maintained his hold on Romano, speaking quietly so only the gang leader could hear. "You were wrong about one thing, Marcus. I'm not pretending to be anything. The skills I learned as a warrior serve my calling as a priest. Violence is sometimes necessary, but it should always be the last resort, used only in defense of the innocent." He adjusted his grip as FBI agents approached with restraints. "Remember that during your time in prison, and remember that regardless of your crimes, you'll find the church's doors open when you're ready to truly repent." As Romano was led away in handcuffs, Father Thomas straightened his water-soaked vestments and made the sign of the cross. The sanctuary, despite its desecration, still held echoes of its sacred purpose. Tonight, it had served as the stage for both judgment and mercy, a fitting metaphor for his own journey from warrior to priest. Timothy, who had been safely evacuated, would need counseling to process this trauma. The neighborhood would need time to heal from Romano's influence. But as Thomas surveyed the scene, he felt a deep sense of peace. Tonight, both aspects of his nature, the warrior and the shepherd, had worked in perfect harmony to protect his flock. The following morning, St. Michael's Church stood quiet in the early dawn light. Father Thomas sat in the confessional, not to hear confessions but to gather his thoughts. The events at the Hellfire Club had concluded mere hours ago, yet the ripples were already spreading through the community. Local news vans had begun appearing outside the church, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like modern prayers. Officer Sarah Chen entered the church, her footsteps echoing in the empty nave. She found Thomas exactly where she expected, where he always returned after moments of crisis. "The FBI's preliminary report is ready," she said softly, respecting the sacred space. "Romano and 23 others are in custody, Blades being treated for his injuries under guard at Providence General. The weapon charges alone will keep them occupied for years." Thomas emerged from the confessional, his movements showing no sign of the previous night's exertion. He had exchanged his modified vestments for traditional clerical attire. Though Sarah noticed he had kept the reinforced collar, some habits formed over decades of combat readiness were hard to break. "And Timothy?" he asked, his voice carrying the concern of both a priest and a protector. "With his parents at home, under protective custody, until we're certain we've rounded up all of Romano's associates. The department psychologist says he's handling it remarkably well. He keeps telling everyone how his priest moved like a superhero." Sarah smiled slightly. "The boy's already asking when he can return to altar service." Thomas moved to the altar, straightening a candlestick with precise movements. "The neighborhood will need time to heal. Romano's influence ran deep, corrupted many. Some of his victims were also his accomplices." He turned to face Sarah. "The hardest part begins now, helping this community rebuild trust." "About that," Sarah hesitated, then continued, "the FBI is interested in your particular skill set. They're suggesting a formal liaison role, helping to identify and rehabilitate veterans who've been recruited by criminal organizations. Your background makes you uniquely qualified to reach them." The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colored patterns across the church floor. Thomas watched the play of light, reminded of similar patterns in Afghan mountains and Colombian jungles. "My place is here," he said finally, "but perhaps there's a way to serve both purposes. Many of those veterans need spiritual guidance as much as they need law enforcement intervention." Their conversation was interrupted by Sister Margaret's arrival. The elderly nun carried herself with the same dignity as always, though her eyes showed concern. "Thomas, the bishop is on his way. The archdiocese has questions about last night's events." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Some members of the congregation are also expressing concerns about having a priest with your background." "Of course they are," Thomas replied, a touch of weariness entering his voice. "They've just learned their shepherd was once a wolf himself. It's natural to question, to doubt." He straightened his collar, a gesture that now carried additional meaning for those who knew its true nature. "But perhaps that's exactly why I was called to this path. Who better to protect the flock than someone who understands the predator's mind?" Sarah watched him closely, recognizing the complex interplay of his dual natures. "What will you tell the bishop?" "The truth," Thomas said simply, "that every skill I learned as a warrior now serves a higher purpose. That the tactical awareness that once helped me eliminate threats now helps me identify troubled souls in need of guidance. That the precision and discipline required for combat operations now enable me to maintain order and peace in a challenging parish." Sister Margaret nodded approvingly. "And what of the media? They're already calling you the warrior priest. They'll want interviews, details about your military service." "They'll get neither," Thomas replied firmly. "My past operations remain classified, and my present calling requires humility, not publicity. The story they want to tell would only sensationalize violence and diminish the true miracle, that faith can transform even the most skilled warrior into an instrument of peace." Dim, the church bells began to toll, marking the hour. Soon, the congregation would arrive for morning mass, many carrying questions about their priest's true nature. Thomas moved toward the sacristy to prepare, but paused to add one final thought. "In Afghanistan, I learned that every warrior eventually faces a choice: to be consumed by the violence they've witnessed, or to channel those experiences into protecting others. I chose the latter and found my way to the priesthood. Now, every skill I possess serves two masters: the tactical requirements of protection and the spiritual demands of redemption." As Father Thomas prepared for Mass, he reflected on the delicate balance he maintained. The modified collar around his neck was a perfect symbol, protection hidden within the symbols of faith, just as his combat skills now served a higher purpose. The neighborhood was safer, but the real work was just beginning. Healing would require both the warrior's strength and the priest's compassion, a combination he was uniquely qualified to provide. Bishop Michael Sullivan's black Lincoln arrived at St. Michael's precisely at 9 o'clock. The ecclesiastical leader emerged from the vehicle with the measured dignity of his office, his expression carefully neutral as he observed the media vehicles still clustered around the church grounds. Father Thomas met him at the entrance, noting how the morning light caught the golden cross suspended from the bishop's neck, a stark contrast to his own reinforced collar. "Walk with me, Thomas," the bishop said quietly, gesturing toward the church gardens. As they moved among the carefully tended roses, a testament to Sister Margaret's dedication, Bishop Sullivan maintained a thoughtful silence. Finally, he spoke. "The Vatican has taken notice of last night's events. It's not every day that a parish priest dismantles a criminal empire using military tactics." Father Thomas kept pace with his superior, hands clasped behind his back in what the bishop recognized as a military bearing. "Your Grace, everything I did was in service of protecting my congregation and rescuing an innocent child." "Yes, Timothy," the bishop nodded. "I've spoken with his parents. They're understandably grateful, though somewhat shaken by the revelation of their priest's particular set of skills." He paused beside a stone bench, turning to face Thomas directly. "The question before us is not about the righteousness of your actions, but about their implications for your ministry." Inside the church, the morning mass continued under Sister Margaret's guidance, the hymns floating out through the stained glass windows. The familiar sounds provided a poignant backdrop to this crucial conversation. Thomas waited patiently, knowing the bishop had more to say. "When you came to us 7 years ago," Bishop Sullivan continued, "your military record was sealed. We knew you had served, but the details of your operations were classified. Some members of the diocese questioned whether someone with your background could truly embrace a life of peace." A slight smile crossed his face. "I supported your ordination because I saw in you something essential to our modern church, the capability to protect coupled with the wisdom to know when protection requires action and when it requires restraint." A police car rolled past the church grounds, Officer Chen at the wheel, maintaining a discreet protective presence. The bishop noticed, but didn't comment. "The media is calling you the warrior priest, Thomas. Some of my colleagues fear this will glorify violence within the church. Others suggest your actions have created a powerful testament to redemption and the many forms of God's service." "And what do you believe, Your Grace?" Thomas asked quietly. The bishop's response was measured. "I believe that in an increasingly complex world, the church must adapt while maintaining its core principles. Your background gives you unique insights into both human conflict and human redemption. Last night, you demonstrated that these seemingly contradictory aspects can work in harmony. He gestured toward the church. But now comes the true test of your ministry. Inside, the congregation was completing the Lord's Prayer. Thomas could hear Timothy's voice among them. The boy had insisted on attending Mass despite his ordeal, another small miracle in a night full of them. The bishop noticed Thomas's attention to the sound. The diocese has received requests from other parishes, he continued. Communities facing similar challenges with criminal elements. They're asking if you would consider consulting, helping them develop programs to protect their congregations while maintaining their spiritual mission. Thomas absorbed this information thoughtfully. My place is here, Your Grace. This community needs stability, especially now. Perhaps, the bishop replied, but consider this. Your expertise could help other priests protect their flocks without resorting to violence. Your experience bridges the gap between security and spirituality. That's a rare and valuable perspective. The morning sun had risen higher, casting shorter shadows across the garden. From this angle, Thomas could see the top of the Hellfire Club several blocks away, its neon signs dark in the daylight. The building stood as a reminder of how thin the line was between order and chaos, and how important it was to have guardians who understood both sides of that line. The early church, Bishop Sullivan added, had its warrior saints, soldiers who laid down their swords to serve God, yet used their training to protect the faithful when necessary. St. Martin of Tours, St. George, St. Maurice, all military men who found a higher purpose. He touched the sleeve of Thomas's cassock gently. Perhaps you're a modern continuation of that tradition. Father Thomas considered this perspective carefully. The skills I learned as a warrior, he said slowly, they don't just apply to physical combat. They help me recognize souls in crisis, anticipate spiritual threats, and maintain discipline in difficult situations. Every aspect of my military training now serves my priestly vocation. Exactly, the bishop nodded approvingly. Which is why I'm not here to censure you, but to discuss expanding your ministry. The church needs shepherds who understand wolves, Thomas, not to fight them unnecessarily, but to protect the flock with wisdom and discernment. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through St. Michael's nave as Father Thomas conducted a special prayer service for the community. The pews were filled beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the vestibule. Among the congregation sat Timothy and his family, Officer Chen, and even several former members of the Devil's Hand who had come seeking guidance after Romano's fall. Thomas's homily addressed the events that had transformed their neighborhood, but not in the way many expected. Rather than discussing the dramatic confrontation at the Hellfire Club, he spoke about transformation, redemption, and the various forms of service to a higher purpose. His words carried the weight of personal experience, resonating with both long-time parishioners and newcomers drawn by recent events. In every life, he said from the pulpit, his voice carrying to the furthest corners of the church, we face moments of choice, moments when we must decide whether to let our past define us or refine us. The skills we possess, whether acquired in combat or commerce, in struggle or study, are neither inherently good nor evil. Their virtue lies in how we choose to use them. In the front pew, Bishop Sullivan nodded approvingly. The ecclesiastical leader had spent the morning in discussions with Father Thomas about the future of his ministry, and now watched as the priest demonstrated exactly why his unique background was an asset rather than a liability. After the service, Thomas met with various members of his congregation in the church office. Each conversation revealed different aspects of how the community was processing recent events. A veteran sought guidance on managing combat-related stress. A local business owner asked about organizing a neighborhood watch program. Parents wanted advice on teaching their children about standing up to intimidation without resorting to violence. Sister Margaret efficiently managed the flow of visitors while maintaining her own careful observations. She noticed how Thomas adjusted his approach for each conversation: militant precision when speaking with veterans, pastoral gentleness with frightened parishioners, and tactical clarity with community organizers. His dual nature wasn't a contradiction. It was a bridge between different aspects of community needs. As evening approached, Officer Chen arrived with updates from the ongoing investigation. "Romano's organization is completely dismantled," she reported. "Several of his lieutenants are cooperating with authorities, hoping for leniency. But more importantly, other gangs are actively avoiding this neighborhood. Word has spread about the warrior priest who protects this territory." Thomas frowned slightly at the nickname. "We need to be careful about that narrative, Sarah. This isn't about creating another strongman figure. It's about empowering the community to protect itself through unity and faith." "Agreed," Bishop Sullivan interjected, having overheard the conversation, "which is why I've approved your proposal for the community outreach program. A combination of spiritual guidance, self-defense training for the vulnerable, and support services for veterans at risk of being recruited by criminal organizations." The program had been Thomas's response to the bishop's suggestion of expanding his ministry. Rather than leaving his parish to consult with other churches, he would establish St. Michael's as a center for integrating security and spirituality. The approach would allow him to maintain his primary duties while sharing his unique perspective with those who needed it most. "The diocese will provide additional resources," the bishop continued. "We're assigning 2 more priests to help with regular services, freeing you to focus on this specialized ministry. Sister Margaret has already volunteered to coordinate with local veterans organizations." Thomas moved to the window, watching as his parishioners mingled in the gathering dusk. The sight of former gang members engaged in respectful conversation with longtime church members was particularly moving. This is an opportunity to demonstrate that strength and compassion aren't mutually exclusive, that the skills that make a warrior effective can be redirected to serve peace. Officer Chen smiled thoughtfully. "You're creating a model for community policing that neither my department nor the church could develop independently, a way to address both the spiritual and security needs of vulnerable neighborhoods." The conversation was interrupted by Timothy's arrival. The boy had shown remarkable resilience in the aftermath of his ordeal, but more importantly, he had begun asking profound questions about service and protection. "Father Thomas," he said earnestly, "I've been thinking about what you said in the homily, about choices defining us. I want to learn how to protect people like you do." Thomas exchanged glances with Timothy's parents, who had accompanied him. "Protection takes many forms, Timothy. Some protect with strength, others with wisdom, many with faith. The trick is learning to use all these tools in harmony." He placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "Perhaps you'd like to help Sister Margaret organize our new youth program? We'll need young leaders who understand both the challenges and the solutions." The moment crystallized everything Thomas had been working toward: the seamless integration of his warrior's skills and priestly calling, creating a framework for others to find their own path to meaningful service. The shadow of the Hellfire Club might have been lifted from the neighborhood, but the real work was just beginning. 1 month after the events at the Hellfire Club, St. Michael's Church had transformed into something unprecedented in the diocese. The basement hall, once used primarily for bingo nights and coffee socials, now hosted a carefully structured program that reflected both aspects of Father Thomas's expertise: The space had been renovated to accommodate both traditional prayer groups and practical training sessions, with areas designated for spiritual counseling alongside spaces for teaching defensive awareness and community protection strategies. On this particular morning, Thomas observed from the doorway as Sister Margaret conducted a session with a group of local business owners. She was explaining the newly established Neighborhood Watch program, which integrated security protocols with community outreach initiatives. The elderly nun had proven remarkably adept at translating Thomas's tactical knowledge into practical civilian applications. "Remember," Sister Margaret emphasized to her attentive audience, "true security isn't about confrontation, it's about awareness and prevention." Father Thomas taught us that the best defense is creating a community too strong to be victimized in the first place. Officer Chen appeared at Thomas's side, her expression thoughtful as she watched the session. "The department's statistics for the past month are remarkable," she reported quietly. "Criminal activity in the parish boundary is down 70%. But more significantly, community engagement with law enforcement has increased dramatically. People are no longer afraid to report problems or seek help." Thomas nodded, understanding the implications. Fear isolates. Once people realize they're not alone, that their church and community stand with them, it becomes harder for criminal elements to establish control. He gestured toward another room, where Timothy was helping younger children learn basic situational awareness through what appeared to be a game. "The key is teaching protection without promoting violence, strength through unity rather than force." The program had evolved beyond its initial concept. What started as a response to gang activity had developed into a comprehensive approach to community resilience, veterans finding purpose through mentoring youth, former gang members using their street knowledge to help identify and prevent recruitment of vulnerable teens. All of it anchored in spiritual guidance that acknowledged the complexities of modern urban life. Bishop Sullivan arrived for his weekly observation, his presence no longer causing the stir it had in the early days of the program. "The other parishes are watching closely, Thomas," he said after greeting both the priest and Officer Chen. "Your model is proving that churches can take an active role in community protection without compromising their spiritual mission." The bishop's support had been crucial in navigating the initial skepticism from more traditional elements within the church. Some had worried that incorporating security training into parish activities would militarize the congregation. Instead, they found that combining practical protection with spiritual guidance created a more holistic approach to ministry. "The media attention has finally begun to fade," Thomas noted, watching as another group gathered for afternoon prayers. "That's helping us focus on the real work." The initial flood of reporters had been challenging, all of them seeking sensational stories about the warrior priest. Thomas's firm refusal to dramatize events, combined with his emphasis on community building over personal recognition, had eventually led them to seek stories elsewhere. Sarah Chen gestured toward a corner where several former Devil's Hand members sat in earnest discussion with a parish councillor. "Your background gives you credibility with both sides, the protectors and those who need protection. They trust you because you understand both warfare and peace." The conversation paused as they observed a remarkable scene unfolding before them. A veteran suffering from PTSD had become agitated during a group session. Before anyone could intervene, one of the reformed gang members approached him with surprising gentleness, speaking quietly about his own struggles with violence and redemption. The moment perfectly exemplified the program's core principle, that healing and protection often came from unexpected sources. "You've created something unique here, Thomas," Bishop Sullivan observed, "a model that could be adapted for other communities facing similar challenges. The Vatican has expressed interest in developing a formal framework based on your approach. Thomas considered this as he watched his diverse congregation interact. The principles are universal, but the implementation has to remain local, he replied. Each community has its own challenges, its own dynamics. What works here might need significant adaptation elsewhere. Sister Margaret approached, carrying a stack of registration forms for new program participants. "We're seeing interest from beyond the parish boundaries now," she reported. "People are traveling from other neighborhoods, even other cities. They're not just seeking protection, they're looking for a way to integrate their faith with practical action." Father Thomas understood the broader implications. His unique combination of military experience and spiritual calling had created a bridge between two worlds often seen as incompatible. The program wasn't just about protecting a neighborhood from criminal elements. It was about showing how strength and compassion could work together in service of a higher purpose. The success of St. Michael's Community Protection Program brought with it new challenges that tested Father Thomas's unique combination of military wisdom and spiritual guidance. 2 months after the program's inception, he found himself addressing an unprecedented situation in his office, where Officer Chen had brought troubling news about unexpected consequences of their success. "Other neighborhoods are seeing an uptick in criminal activity," Sarah reported, spreading crime statistics across Thomas's desk. "As we've strengthened this community, the criminal elements haven't disappeared. They've relocated. The displacement effect is causing problems in areas that aren't as well organized." Thomas studied the reports with the same careful attention he had once given to military intelligence briefings. The pattern was clear. Their success in protecting one community had inadvertently increased pressure on others. "We're winning the battle, but risking the wider war," he observed, his tactical training providing clarity to the situation. Bishop Sullivan, who had arrived for his regular oversight meeting, joined their discussion. "This raises important questions about the scope of our responsibility," he noted. "Does our duty to protect extend beyond our parish boundaries? And if so, how do we balance our limited resources with growing needs?" The question had been weighing on Thomas's mind as well. His military experience had taught him that securing one area often meant creating vulnerabilities elsewhere. But his priestly vocation demanded a more comprehensive approach to protection and salvation. "We've received requests from 3 other parishes to implement similar programs," Sister Margaret added, joining them with a stack of correspondence. "But they lack someone with your background to lead them, Thomas. They're asking for training, guidance, and direct support." The morning light streaming through the stained glass windows cast meaningful patterns across the gathering. Thomas moved to the window, observing the community he had helped transform. Below, Timothy was leading a group of younger children in a modified awareness exercise, teaching them to look out for each other while maintaining their innocence and joy. "Perhaps we're thinking about this the wrong way," Thomas said finally, turning back to face his colleagues. "In Force Recon, we learned that direct action isn't always the most effective approach. Sometimes the best strategy is to train and empower others to protect themselves." His words sparked immediate interest from Bishop Sullivan. "What exactly are you proposing, Thomas?" "A training program for other parishes," he replied, his mind already formulating the structure. "Not to create more warrior priests, but to help each community identify and develop its own protectors. Every neighborhood has veterans, former law enforcement, security professionals, people with valuable skills who could be guided to serve their communities in constructive ways." Officer Chen nodded thoughtfully. "Like a force multiplier effect, instead of spreading ourselves thin trying to protect everyone directly, we teach communities to organize their own protection under proper spiritual and tactical guidance." Thomas moved to his desk, beginning to outline the concept. We create a framework that any parish could adapt to its specific needs. The core principles remain constant: integration of security and spirituality, community engagement, prevention over confrontation. But the implementation would be tailored to each location's unique challenges and resources. Sister Margaret, ever practical, was already considering logistics. We could start with workshops for parish leaders, teaching them how to identify potential security coordinators within their communities. Focus on character assessment, leadership development, and the proper balance of protection and compassion. This aligns perfectly with the Vatican's interest in your approach, Bishop Sullivan noted. They've been particularly impressed by how you've maintained spiritual priority while addressing practical security needs. A formalized training program could help other parishes navigate that balance. Thomas pulled out a map of the diocese, studying the distribution of parishes and their relationships to areas experiencing displaced criminal activity. We create a network, he explained, his tactical mind engaging with the spiritual mission. Each parish becomes a node of protection and community resilience, supporting each other rather than just defending their own territories. The concept resonated with his military experience in unexpected ways. Just as Force Recon operations often involve training local forces to defend their own territories, this program would empower communities to protect themselves while maintaining their spiritual foundation. There will be resistance, Officer Chen warned. Some communities might see this as militarizing their churches. That's why the spiritual component is crucial, Thomas replied. We're not teaching people to fight, we're teaching them to protect, to prevent, to build community strength through faith and unity. The tactical elements are secondary to the spiritual mission, tools in service of a higher purpose. Bishop Sullivan's expression showed growing approval. You're proposing to scale the miracle that happened here, not by replicating yourself, but by helping each community find its own path to protection and redemption. The morning bells began to toll, calling the faithful to prayer. As their sound washed over the neighborhood, Thomas reflected on how far they had come from the night he confronted Romano's gang. What had begun as one priest using his combat skills to protect his flock had evolved into something far more significant, a model for communities to find strength in faith while maintaining practical readiness for real-world challenges. St. Michael's Parish Hall had been transformed into a training center for the diocese's new Community Protection Initiative. Representatives from 12 parishes across 3 states filled the room, each selected for their commitment to implementing Father Thomas's integrated approach to security and spirituality. The morning session found Thomas addressing this diverse group, his bearing reflecting both his military precision and pastoral care. Protection of the faithful takes many forms, Thomas explained, standing before a carefully assembled presentation. Our goal is not to create militant parishes, but to build resilient communities grounded in faith and prepared for modern challenges. His audience included priests, parish administrators, and selected community leaders, each bringing unique perspectives to the program. Sister Margaret observed from the back of the room, noting how Thomas seamlessly wove tactical awareness into spiritual context. When discussing threat assessment, he referenced biblical passages about watchmen on the walls. Security protocols were presented alongside principles of community outreach and pastoral care. The integration was subtle but effective, demonstrating how protection could enhance, rather than compromise, spiritual mission. Officer Chen participated as a law enforcement liaison, helping to establish proper boundaries and procedures. Community protection requires partnership with local authorities, she emphasized during her portion of the training. We're creating a network of mutual support, not independent security forces. The morning's theoretical framework gave way to practical applications in the afternoon. Thomas led the group through St. Michael's facilities, demonstrating how they had modified the space to serve both security and spiritual needs. The former coffee hall now doubled as a training area for situational awareness classes. The parish office incorporated subtle security features while maintaining its welcoming atmosphere. Notice how the physical changes support our mission without changing our essential character, Thomas explained. Every modification serves both practical and spiritual purposes. He indicated the newly installed lighting system that enhanced both security and the building's architectural beauty. We're not fortifying churches, we're strengthening communities. During a break in the training, Bishop Sullivan arrived to observe and speak with participants. A parish administrator from Boston raised concerns about resistance from more traditional members of his congregation. They worry we're moving too far from our spiritual mission, he explained. Thomas addressed this common concern with carefully chosen words. When Christ sent his disciples into the world, he advised them to be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. Our program maintains that balance. We're not teaching aggression, we're fostering wisdom, awareness, and community solidarity. The practical demonstration portion of the training provided compelling evidence of this philosophy. Timothy, now serving as a youth program coordinator, helped demonstrate how security awareness could be taught through engaging activities that built community bonds rather than fear. Former gang members, now program volunteers, shared insights about recognizing and preventing criminal influence in vulnerable communities. The key, Thomas emphasized, is understanding that security doesn't come from force alone. It comes from building communities too strong to be easily victimized. He shared data from their own parish's experience, showing how crime reduction correlated with increased community engagement and spiritual participation. As the afternoon progressed, participants worked in small groups to adapt the program's principles to their specific parish needs. A church from an affluent suburban area focused on preventing youth recruitment by criminal organizations. An inner-city parish developed strategies for protecting elderly parishioners. Each group received personalized guidance while maintaining the core principles of the program. Sister Margaret led a session on identifying and developing community leaders. "Look for those who already serve," she advised. "The veterans in your congregation, the former law enforcement officers, the security professionals, people with protective skills who need spiritual purpose. Guide them to use their abilities in service of the community." The day's training concluded with a practical exercise in the church sanctuary. Participants learned to assess their worship spaces with new eyes, considering both security and spiritual needs. Thomas demonstrated how subtle changes in usher positioning and greeting procedures could enhance protection while improving the worship experience. "Remember," Thomas concluded, "we're not changing our mission. We're adapting how we fulfill it. In an increasingly challenging world, protecting our flocks requires wisdom, preparation, and unwavering faith. But most importantly, it requires community." As the participants departed, Bishop Sullivan pulled Thomas aside. "The Vatican representatives will be observing tomorrow's session," he informed him. "They're particularly interested in how this program could be adapted for parishes worldwide." Thomas nodded, already considering the implications. The program's success had created new opportunities, but with them came greater responsibility. As he watched the training participants leave, each carrying plans to transform their own parishes, he reflected on how far they had come from that night at the Hellfire Club. What began as one priest's response to a local threat had evolved into something that could change how churches approach their protective role in modern society. The morning sun illuminated St. Michael's Church as two Vatican observers arrived for the second day of training. Monsignor Giuseppe Rossi and Father Antonio Bianchi represented the Holy See's Commission on Parish Security, their presence reflecting Rome's growing interest in Father Thomas's innovative program. They moved with the measured dignity of experienced church administrators, their trained eyes taking in every detail of the transformed parish. Thomas greeted them in the vestibule, conscious that this evaluation could determine the program's future beyond American borders. "Welcome to St. Michael's," he said, noting how Monsignor Rossi's gaze lingered on the subtle security modifications to the entrance. "We've prepared a comprehensive demonstration of our community protection initiatives." Bishop Sullivan accompanied the Vatican representatives as Thomas led them through the morning's training session. Today's focus was on crisis response and community mobilization, demonstrated through a carefully orchestrated simulation. The observers watched intently as parish representatives practiced coordinating their response to various scenarios, from natural disasters to criminal threats. "Notice how the response protocols integrate with existing church structures," Thomas explained, indicating how the parish phone tree doubled as an emergency notification system. "We're not creating parallel organizations, we're enhancing the church's traditional role as a community cornerstone." Monsignor Rossi's questions were precise and probing. "Father Morrison, the Vatican has received reports from several dioceses about your program. Some express concern about militarizing parish life. How do you maintain the proper balance between security and spirituality?" Thomas guided them to where Timothy was conducting a youth group session. The children were engaged in what appeared to be a simple game, but one that subtly taught awareness and community support. "Our approach emphasizes prevention through community strength," he explained. "The tactical elements serve the spiritual mission, not the other way around." Father Bianchi, who had extensive experience with parishes in conflict zones, showed particular interest in the rehabilitation aspects of the program. Several former gang members were present, now serving as program volunteers and sharing their experiences to prevent youth recruitment. "This integration of former adversaries," he noted, "it reflects the Church's mission of redemption." The afternoon session demonstrated the program's adaptability to different contexts. Parish representatives from various backgrounds presented their modified implementation plans, each tailored to specific community needs while maintaining the core principles. A parish from rural Maine described their focus on addiction prevention and community support. An inner-city church from Philadelphia outlined their strategies for gang intervention and youth protection. Sister Margaret led a presentation on the program's spiritual foundation, emphasizing how every security measure was grounded in Catholic social teaching. "Our goal is not just physical safety," she explained, "but the creation of communities where faith can flourish without fear." The Vatican observers paid particular attention to the data Officer Chen presented, showing the measurable impact on crime rates and community engagement. "The statistics are compelling," Monsignor Rossi acknowledged, "but more impressive is the increase in mass attendance and community participation." As the day progressed, Thomas guided the observers through the practical aspects of the program. They visited the modified parish facilities, observed training sessions, and interviewed program participants. The former Hellfire Club, visible from the church steps, stood as a testament to the program's origins and effectiveness. "The church faces unique challenges in different parts of the world," Father Bianchi noted during a private consultation. "How would you adapt this program for parishes in areas with more severe security concerns?" Thomas's response drew from both his military experience and pastoral wisdom. "The principles remain constant: community engagement, prevention through strength, and spiritual foundation. The specific implementation adapts to local needs. A parish in a conflict zone might emphasize different aspects than one dealing with organized crime, but the core approach remains the same. Monsignor Rossi raised the crucial question near the day's end. Your background is unique, Father Morrison. How can this program succeed in parishes without someone of your particular experience? My role is not to replicate myself, Thomas explained, but to help each community identify and develop its own protectors. Every parish has members with relevant skills and experience. Our program gives them a framework to use those abilities in service of their faith community. The observers' final meeting with Bishop Sullivan and Father Thomas extended into the evening. As church bells marked the hour, Monsignor Rossi shared the Vatican's preliminary assessment. What you've created here goes beyond simple security measures. You've developed a model for modern parish resilience that honors both the Church's traditions and its obligations to protect the faithful. The implications were clear. St. Michael's program would serve as a template for parishes worldwide. Thomas's response to a local threat had evolved into something that could strengthen the Church's protective role globally, while maintaining its essential spiritual mission. As the Vatican representatives departed, Thomas remained in the sanctuary, offering prayers of guidance for the program's future. The challenges ahead were significant, but he had learned that with faith, proper training, and community support, even the most daunting obstacles could be overcome. The week following the Vatican observers' departure brought significant changes to St. Michael's Church. Father Thomas found himself managing an unprecedented expansion of responsibilities while maintaining his core commitment to his local congregation. His office had transformed into a coordination center, with maps marking potential implementation sites across multiple continents and documentation in various languages outlining adaptation strategies for different cultural contexts. Bishop Sullivan arrived early one morning to find Thomas already at work, reviewing reports from pilot programs in several American dioceses. The Vatican's formal approval came through last night, the bishop announced, placing an official document on Thomas's desk. They're establishing a new Office of Parish Security and Community Resilience. They want you to serve as principal advisor while maintaining your duties here. Thomas studied the document thoughtfully. The papal seal caught the morning light, a reminder of the universal Church's reach and responsibility. This creates both opportunities and challenges, he observed. We'll need to ensure the program maintains its integrity while adapting to vastly different contexts. Sister Margaret entered with the morning's correspondence, which now included requests from parishes as far away as the Philippines and Brazil. The international interest is overwhelming, she reported. Many of these communities face challenges we hadn't anticipated. A parish in Mexico City is dealing with cartel intimidation. Another in Eastern Europe is concerned about human trafficking networks. Officer Chen, arriving for their regular security briefing, added her perspective. We're receiving inquiries from law enforcement agencies in several countries. They're interested in how we've integrated community policing with parish-based protection programs. Thomas moved to the large wall map they'd installed to track program implementation. Colored pins marked existing and potential sites, creating a visual representation of the program's expanding reach. Each location requires careful consideration, he explained. We're not just exporting a security protocol, we're helping communities rediscover their capacity for self-protection through faith and unity. The morning's work was interrupted by Timothy's arrival. The boy, now a confident youth program coordinator, brought news from the latest community outreach session. Father, the former gang members who volunteered for the mentorship program have some ideas for adapting our methods for international use. They understand how criminal organizations think across different cultures. This unexpected resource highlighted the program's organic evolution. Those who had once threatened the community were now contributing to its protection and helping others achieve similar transformations. Thomas recognized the profound symmetry. His own journey from warrior to priest now reflected in their transitions from predators to protectors. Bishop Sullivan shared updates from his recent communications with Rome. The Vatican sees this program as part of the Church's response to modern challenges. They're particularly interested in how it could help parishes in regions with weak governmental structures or high corruption. Thomas began outlining adaptation protocols, drawing from both his military experience and pastoral insights. Each implementation needs 3 key elements, he explained. First, a thorough understanding of local challenges and resources. Second, identification and training of community protectors who understand both security and spirituality. Third, integration with existing parish structures to ensure the program enhances rather than disrupts church life. And thus the discussion turned to practical considerations of international implementation. Sister Margaret had already begun developing training materials in multiple languages, while Officer Chen worked on establishing communication protocols between participating parishes and local law enforcement agencies worldwide. The program's strength lies in its adaptability, Thomas emphasized. In some locations, the focus might be on protecting parishioners from criminal exploitation. In others, it might center on preventing youth recruitment into extremist groups. But the core principle remains constant: building community resilience through faith-based protection initiatives. As they worked through implementation strategies, Thomas received an unexpected call from Monsignor Rossi in Rome. The Vatican Observer shared news of the program's first international success. A parish in Naples had successfully adapted the model to counter local organized crime influence, achieving results similar to St. Michael's victory over the Devil's Hand. This early validation strengthened Thomas's conviction about the program's universal applicability. Every parish has its own Devil's Hand to confront, he reflected after the call. Our role is to help them find their own strength, guided by faith and supported by practical protection measures. The day concluded with a special evening service, where Thomas offered prayers for the program's expanding mission. The congregation, now well versed in their role as pioneers of this new approach, understood they were part of something larger than their local community. Their experience would help guide parishes worldwide in finding the balance between protection and faith. As darkness fell, Thomas stood in the church doorway watching his transformed neighborhood. The former Hellfire Club, now scheduled for demolition, would soon be replaced by a community center. It served as a powerful metaphor for the program's mission, transforming places of darkness into sources of light and strength. 1 year after the confrontation at the Hellfire Club, Father Thomas stood at St. Michael's altar preparing for a special commemorative Mass. The sanctuary was filled beyond capacity, with representatives from parishes worldwide joining his local congregation. The gathering marked not just the anniversary of that pivotal night, but the successful implementation of the parish protection program in over 200 churches across 5 continents. Where the former Hellfire Club once stood, a new community center rose against the morning sky. Its modern architecture incorporated elements of the church's design, creating a visual bridge between sacred space and community service. Inside, former gang members worked alongside retired law enforcement officers, teaching young people the principles of community protection and spiritual growth that had transformed their neighborhood. Bishop Sullivan, now appointed by the Vatican to oversee the global implementation of the program, addressed the gathering. 1 year ago, a single priest's response to local threats sparked a revolution in how the Church approaches its protective mission. Today, we witness the fruits of that courage in parishes from Manila to Mexico City, from Rio to Rome. Thomas listened as various representatives shared their community's experiences. A priest from Belfast described how the program had helped bridge historical divisions by focusing on shared security concerns. A parish administrator from Lagos reported significant reductions in criminal activity through their adapted implementation. Each testimony reinforced the program's core principle, that true security emerged from the combination of practical protection and spiritual strength. Officer Chen, recently promoted to liaison between international law enforcement agencies and the Church's new Office of Parish Security, presented compelling statistics. Crime rates had dropped significantly in participating parishes, while church attendance and community engagement had risen. More importantly, the program had created sustainable models for community protection that didn't rely on force or confrontation. Sister Margaret, who had become instrumental in training program coordinators worldwide, shared stories of transformation. Former adversaries working together to protect their communities, veterans finding new purpose in teaching security awareness through a spiritual lens, young people like Timothy growing into leadership roles that balanced strength with compassion. As Thomas delivered his homily, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 1 year ago, we faced a choice between fear and faith, between violence and protection. We chose a path that honored both our need for security and our calling to serve God's purpose. Today, we see that choice bearing fruit far beyond our parish boundaries. The congregation included faces that would have seemed impossible to unite a year earlier. Former gang members sat beside the law enforcement officers who had once pursued them. Business owners who had paid protection money now worked with reformed criminals to prevent exploitation. The community had not just survived its trial by fire, it had emerged stronger, more unified, and more purposeful. Timothy, now heading the youth outreach program, led a demonstration of how the next generation had embraced the program's principles. Young people from diverse backgrounds showed how they had integrated security awareness into their faith practice, creating a model that other parishes could adapt for their own youth ministries. The Vatican's permanent representative to the program, Father Bianchi, spoke about its international impact. What began as one priest using his unique background to protect his flock has evolved into a worldwide movement. Father Morrison showed us that the Church's ancient mission of shepherding the faithful could adapt to modern challenges without compromising its spiritual essence. Thomas's final remarks addressed the future. Our work continues because the challenges never cease, but we face them now with the knowledge that faith and protection can work in harmony, that communities can be both secure and spiritually vibrant, that former adversaries can become allies in service of a higher purpose. As the service concluded, Thomas stood at the church doors, greeting people from around the world who had come to learn from their experience. Each face represented a community in transition, seeking its own path to security through faith. The program he had started had taken on a life of its own, adapting and evolving to serve diverse needs while maintaining its core principles. The day ended, as it had begun, with Thomas in quiet prayer at the altar. But now his prayers encompassed not just his local flock, but communities worldwide, striving to find their own balance between protection and faith. The warrior priest had discovered that his greatest military victory had come not through combat, but through showing others how to prevent conflict through strength, unity, and unwavering faith. Outside, the setting sun cast long shadows through the stained glass windows, their colors falling across the church floor in patterns that seemed to connect past and present, warrior and priest, protection and peace. The legacy of that night at the Hellfire Club would continue to grow, touching lives and transforming communities far beyond the boundaries of one parish, proving that sometimes the most effective way to fight darkness was not with force, but with the light of faith and the strength of unified purpose. 5 years after the events at the Hellfire Club, Father Thomas stood atop St. Michael's bell tower, surveying a neighborhood transformed beyond recognition. The morning sun illuminated a landscape of hope where shadows of fear had once dominated. The community center that replaced the Hellfire Club now served as a beacon of transformation, its programs having helped hundreds of young people avoid the path of violence that had once seemed inevitable. On this particular morning, Thomas had received news that added profound meaning to his journey. Marcus Romano, the former leader of the Devil's Hand, had completed his prison sentence and requested a meeting. The man who had once threatened everything Thomas held dear now sought guidance for his own path to redemption. It was a testament to the program's core belief that even the deepest darkness could be transformed by the light of faith and purpose. Bishop Sullivan, now approaching retirement, joined Thomas in the tower. "The Vatican's latest report confirms what we witnessed here first," he said, handing Thomas a comprehensive document. "The parish protection program has been implemented in over 500 churches worldwide. Crime rates in participating communities have decreased by an average of 60%, while church engagement has increased by 40%. Thomas reflected on these statistics, understanding they represented not just numbers, but transformed lives. "The numbers tell only part of the story," he observed. "The real success lies in the communities that no longer live in fear, in the young people who find purpose in protection rather than violence, in the former adversaries who now work together for the common good." The morning's significance extended beyond Romano's pending visit. Today marked the inauguration of the International Center for Parish Protection and Community Resilience, a training facility built adjacent to St. Michael's. The center would serve as a global hub for the program, where parish leaders from around the world could learn the principles that had begun in this modest neighborhood. Sister Margaret, whose role had evolved to Director of International Training, prepared for the day's first session. The incoming class included representatives from 27 countries, each facing unique challenges in their communities. "Every group brings new perspectives," she reported to Thomas. "We learn as much from them as they learn from us." Timothy, now a college student studying criminal justice and theology, had returned to help with the training. His dual major reflected the program's influence, combining practical protection with spiritual purpose. The boy who had once been a hostage had grown into a young man committed to helping others find the same balance between strength and faith that Father Thomas had demonstrated. Officer Chen, having risen to a senior position in international law enforcement coordination, arrived with updates from global partners. "The model you created has adapted successfully to contexts we never imagined," she told Thomas. "From countering human trafficking in Southeast Asia to preventing youth radicalization in Europe, the core principles remain effective." The morning's activities were interrupted by a young priest from Brazil, eager to share news from his favela parish. Their implementation of the program had not only reduced gang influence, but had created unprecedented cooperation between former rivals. "The drug lord's own children now attend our youth programs," he reported with barely contained excitement. "The cycle of violence is being broken through faith and community." Thomas listened to these reports with humble gratitude, understanding that the program's success extended far beyond his original vision. What had begun as one priest using his military background to protect his flock had evolved into a worldwide movement for positive change. The integration of security and spirituality had proven to be a powerful force for transformation across cultures and contexts. As the day progressed, Thomas prepared for his meeting with Romano. The former gang leader's request for guidance represented everything the program stood for: the possibility of redemption, the power of transformation, and the enduring impact of choosing protection over violence. It was a living testament to the program's core belief that even those who had once dealt in darkness could become instruments of light. The bell tower's height offered a perspective that seemed metaphorical as well as physical. From this vantage point, Thomas could see not just the changed landscape of his neighborhood, but the ripples of transformation extending far beyond. Each church that adopted the program became a center of positive change, each transformed life a testament to the power of faith combined with purpose. As he descended to meet with Romano, Thomas reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The skills he had learned as a warrior had indeed served his calling as a priest, but in ways he could never have anticipated. The program's success proved that protection and faith could work in harmony, that strength and compassion could reinforce each other, and that even the deepest wounds could be healed through purpose and dedication. The legacy of that night at the Hellfire Club continued to grow, touching lives and transforming communities in ways that transcended the original conflict. It stood as proof that sometimes the most powerful weapon against darkness was not force, but faith, not confrontation, but transformation, not victory, but redemption. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.